The air on Tethys 3 was thick enough to chew. It hung in the cargo bay of the Wandering Star, a viscous cocktail of recycled atmosphere, alien spores, and the metallic tang of 1,000 different spacefaring species. For Jax, it was the smell of commerce, of potential, of a job well done. He was a bounty man, a human, and on a station like this, that made him a ghost. Most of the galaxy saw humanity as a quaint, primitive species. A species that had clawed its way to the stars on the back of sheer, stubborn grit, yes, but one that lacked the natural armor of the Krogan, the psychic finesse of the Veil, or the sheer, terrifying mass of the Xylos. We were the galaxy's underdogs, a species of dumb apes who had managed to get lucky. They were wrong. I, on the other hand, was one of the few who knew better. My name is Kalen, a Xylos trader, and I had seen what a human could do, not with a weapon but with their mind. It was why I found myself watching the tall, lanky human named Jax as he leaned against a support strut, his eyes scanning the chaotic flow of the bazaar. He didn't look like much. He wore a worn, tan duster that had seen better centuries, scuffed boots, and a face that was all sharp angles and tired lines. His hair was a dusty brown, and his eyes, a color I couldn't quite define, seemed to see everything and nothing at all. He had a dog with him, a creature of impossible loyalty and obliviousness. It was a lanky, brown beast with a long snout and a perpetually wagging tail. Its name, I had learned, was Rex. Rex was a constant source of amusement to the other species. They saw a clumsy, defenseless pet. To the Xylos, and to me specifically, Rex was a sign, a symbol of a peculiar and powerful human trait, a bond that was utterly irrational and yet undeniably fierce. I was about to move on to return to my own dealings when I saw it. A flash of crimson exoskeleton, a predatory stillness in the crowd. It was a Zyl, and not just any Zyl. This one was a prime. I could tell by the length of its scythe-like forelimbs, the deeper, more vibrant red of its carapace, and the unnerving stillness of its multifaceted eyes. Zyl are apex predators, having evolved on a death world of constant, brutal competition. For them, the universe was a simple equation. There are hunters and there is prey. And this prime had just locked its gaze on Rex. A cold dread, a sensation I hadn't felt in cycles, settled in my gut. I watched the Zyl detach itself from the shadows near a Xiphon merchant's stall. It moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, a lethal whisper in the cacophony of the bazaar. It wasn't stalking Rex in the way a predator would a threat. It was the leisurely, almost bored approach of a being that knew its food was already dead. It saw the dog as a simple, easy meal, a snack to be enjoyed before returning to the hunt. Jax was still scanning the crowd, completely unaware. He was looking for a different kind of threat, one that came with a price on its head. Rex, however, sensed something. His ears flattened, his tail ceased its wagging, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest. The Zyl prime paused, almost amused. The dog's bravado was a joke to it. "Easy, boy," Jax said, his voice a soft murmur. He finally looked down at his dog, then followed the creature's gaze. I saw the exact moment he saw the Zyl. His whole demeanor changed. The relaxed, almost lazy stance vanished, replaced by a coiled tension. His shoulders squared, his eyes narrowed, and a cold, hard focus settled on his face that made the air around him seem to chill. The Zyl prime saw this change and seemed to consider it. It took a step forward, a clear challenge. The message was simple and undeniable. Your pet is mine. The air in the market went still. Even the chatter of the merchants died down. Everyone in the vicinity sensed the shift in atmosphere. The primal conflict was more interesting than any trade deal. Jax didn't draw a weapon. He didn't shout a threat. He did something far more terrifying. He took a step forward, placing himself directly between the Zyl prime and Rex. He looked up at the towering crimson creature, its head almost reaching the ceiling of the bay, and with a voice that was quiet, calm, and utterly absolute, he said something I didn't quite catch. The Zyl prime's head tilted. It was clearly trying to process the threat. The human was a lesser species, a primitive. The dog was its prey. The human stance was a null event. It raised one of its scythe-like limbs, the blade glinting in the dim light, a gesture of dismissal and finality. That was when the human moved. He didn't lunge. He took two perfectly placed steps, his body flowing like water, dodging the initial, almost lazy swipe the Zil Prime made to get him out of the way. Then, in the blink of an eye, Jax was inside the creature's reach. He had produced a small, unassuming device from his pocket. It looked like a metal tube, no bigger than his thumb. He pressed it against the Zil's carapace, right where a human's collarbone would be. There was no flash, no bang, no dramatic explosion. There was only a sharp, high-pitched whine, followed by a sickening thump. The Zil Prime convulsed violently, its limbs spasming before it collapsed to the ground with a sound like a metal drum being dropped. It was out cold, its nervous system completely scrambled. A stunned silence fell over the market. Everyone was staring at the fallen apex predator, and then at the human who was now calmly reassuring his dog. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a primal fear that made the base of my skull prickle. The other species were terrified of the Zil. I had seen them in action. They were walking tanks, unstoppable forces of nature, and this human had just dropped one like it was nothing. He had neutralized a threat that would have given even a Krogan war party pause, all to protect his dog. He wasn't a dumb ape. He was a force of nature in his own right, one that operated on a completely different and far more terrifying level. I saw him give his dog a scratch behind the ears, his expression softening from that predatory focus to something gentler. He was one of the most dangerous beings I had ever encountered, and he was utterly oblivious to the terror he had just inspired. Part 2. The Weight of a Bond. The silence in the market stretched for a few more heartbeats before the noise crashed back in. But it was a different kind of noise now. It was the hushed, frantic whispers of 1,000 different species, all discussing the same thing, the human and the Zil. I watched the scene unfold, my own breath shallow and fast. The Zil Prime lay crumpled, a monument to the folly of underestimating a human. Jax, the source of this chaos, was kneeling. He wasn't gloating or looking for praise. He was running his hands over Rex's body, checking for any sign of injury, his face a mask of profound and absolute concern. His fingers, the same ones that had just felled a galaxy-feared predator, were gentle as they brushed through the dog's fur. "You okay, boy?" he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "That big red jerk didn't get you, did he?" He was utterly focused on the animal, his whole world shrunk to the size of his dog. Rex, for his part, seemed unfazed. He was a creature of boundless and unfiltered emotion. Now that the immediate threat was gone, his fear had evaporated. His tail was wagging again, his tongue lolling out in a happy, dopey grin. He nudged his head against Jax's hand, completely trusting, completely devoted. It was a sight so utterly at odds with the brutal efficiency of the act that had just occurred that it was almost unnerving. A Xiphon merchant, a being of swirling bioluminescent gas housed in a containment suit, floated closer. Its voice was a series of modulated whispers. "Human," it said, the translation unit on his suit buzzing. "That creature was a prime. They are formidable. How did you defeat it?" Jax looked up, his eyes finally leaving his dog. The softness in them was gone, replaced by the hard, unyielding look I'd seen earlier. "He was in my way," Jax said flatly. It was a statement of fact, not a boast. "But it is a powerful creature," the Xiphon persisted. "We have codes, protocols for such encounters. You should have activated the station's security." "My dog is my security," Jax said, his tone brooking no argument. He tapped the device in his hand. "And the security of every being on this station, if you think about it. Your codes would have taken minutes. He was here now." The merchant seemed to sputter, its gas cloud swirling in agitation. Other beings had gathered at a safe distance, forming a wide, wary circle. I saw a Krogan, a massive, armored reptile, watching the human with a new, grudging respect. I saw Vale, the ethereal beings of pure thought, projecting an aura of intense curiosity and concern. They were all reassessing the human. The primitives had teeth. I knew I had to speak with him. My species, the Xylos, are ancient, our civilization spanning millions of years. We have seen countless species rise and fall, but humanity was an anomaly. Their potential, their sheer capacity for savagery and love in equal measure, was something we were still trying to understand. That dog, that simple creature, was a key to that understanding. I stepped forward, announcing my presence with a respectful dip of my head. "Kalen of the Xylos," I said. "I saw what you did. It was efficient." Jax looked at me for a long moment. His eyes, I noticed now, were the color of a stormy sky. He didn't respond immediately. He just studied me, weighing me. I was used to being a subject of curiosity. My species, with our silvery skin and large, dark eyes, are often considered strange. But this human was doing more than just looking at me. He was assessing me, seeing me as a potential threat or a harmless onlooker. It was a deeply unsettling experience. "Yeah," he finally said, the word flat and dismissive. "Just dealing with a problem." "The problem is your companion," I said, gesturing to Rex, who had started sniffing at a discarded food wrapper. "Your attachment to it makes you vulnerable. It's a weakness that your enemies will use against you." That got his attention. A flicker of cold anger there and gone passed through his eyes. "My dog," he said, his voice dropping to a level that was barely audible, "is not a weakness. It's what keeps me from turning into one of those things." He pointed a thumb at the unconscious Zil Prime. "It's what reminds me what I'm fighting for." "Is it worth it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The risk, the conflict, you just made a powerful enemy." Jax looked down at Rex, who was now happily licking his hand. The hard, cold look on his face melted away again, replaced by a weary affection. "Look at him, Kalen," he said. "He doesn't know he's a security risk. He doesn't know he's prey. All he knows is that I'm his best friend, that I'll protect him, and that's a promise I don't break, for anyone." It was a moment that spoke volumes. It explained the impossible courage, the brutal precision of his actions. It wasn't about aggression. It was about protection. It was about a bond so profound that it transcended logic, transcended the very survival instinct that governed the rest of the galaxy. The dock security team arrived then. A squad of heavily armed robotic enforcers, their optics glowing red as they assessed the scene. They were joined by a being who appeared to be in charge, a tall, spindly thing with a blue, multi-segmented body. The station master. It surveyed the scene, its multiple eyes blinking in sequence as it took in the unconscious Zil, the crowd, and Jax. "What happened here?" It demanded, its voice a sharp, synthesized screech. The Xiphon merchant rushed forward, its whispers frantic. "The human. He attacked a Zil Prime without cause. It is a violation of station protocols." Before I could speak, before Jax could defend himself, Rex did. He stepped forward, planted himself in front of his human, and let out a loud, sharp bark. It wasn't a growl of fear or aggression. It was a bark of pure defiance. He was a tiny, brown lump of fur, standing in front of the station master and its army of robotic enforcers, telling them to back off. He was protecting his human, even though he was completely outmatched. The station master froze. Its optic sensors stared at the dog, then at Jax. A ripple of something passed through the crowd. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated absurdity that somehow, impossibly, seemed to diffuse the entire situation. The sheer, illogical bravery of the animal was a display of loyalty that was impossible to argue with. Jax put a hand on Rex's head, a silent gesture of reassurance. "The Zil was the aggressor," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It attempted to harm my companion. I defended him." He looked up at the station master, his gaze unwavering. "I'm sure your security logs will show the same. The station's own surveillance will prove I acted only in self-defense of another life." The station master seemed to consider this. It was a bureaucracy, a being of rules and regulations. It couldn't argue with the logic of the defense. It knew the legal system, and it knew a losing case when it saw one. It let out a long, hissing sigh. "This is not over, human," it said. "I have my eye on you." It then turned to its enforcers, issuing a series of sharp commands to remove the unconscious Zill. The threat had been neutralized, the dog had been defended, and the law, at least for now, had been satisfied. Part 3. The Apex is Human. The Zill was hauled away, its unconscious form a heavy reminder of the cost of its arrogance. The crowd began to dissipate, but the atmosphere remained charged. The whispers continued. Tales of the human and his death hound spreading like wildfire through the station's vast network. I knew this story would travel, a new legend in the galaxy's underworld. The human who had fought a Zill and won, all for a dog. Jax gathered his gear. He produced a small, worn leather ball from his pocket and tossed it. Rex shot after it, his tail a blur of joy, completely oblivious to the fact that he was now the subject of galactic legend. The two of them walked away, the bounty hunter and his dog, leaving the rest of us to our stunned contemplation. I followed him, keeping a respectful distance. I had to understand. I approached them as they were at a small, low-tech vendor stall, Jax buying a piece of dried meat for Rex. "You are a fascinating species," I said, stopping a few feet away. "The Zill are the galaxy's greatest killers. Their very existence is a testament to the power of predation. And yet you, a human, a being without claws, without venom, without psychic powers, defeated one. How?" Jax took the meat, broke off a piece for Rex, and gave it to him. The dog devoured it instantly. He then looked at me, his eyes holding a deep, ancient weariness that I had only ever seen in beings who had lived for millennia. "You think the Zill is the apex predator?" he asked. It was a rhetorical question. "Isn't it?" I replied. "By every biological and evolutionary metric, it is." Jax shook his head slowly. "You and the rest of the galaxy are looking at the wrong thing. You measure a predator by its claws, its armor, its raw power. The Zill are just that. What you call power, I call a crutch." He looked down at Rex, who was nuzzling his hand for more meat. "Humans, we had to be clever, we had to be stubborn, we had to learn to cooperate, we had to learn to love. That's our edge. That's what makes us the apex predator." He stood up, brushing the dust from his knees. "The Zill operates alone. It doesn't have friends, not really. It doesn't have someone who has its back. Rex isn't my pet, Kalen. He's my pack. He's my brother. I would die for him and he would die for me. That bond, that responsibility, it changes the equation. It makes me more dangerous. It gives me a reason to fight that goes far beyond simple survival. The Zill wants to eat. I want to protect. There's a difference." It was the most profound thing I had ever heard. I had spent my life studying the great philosophies of the galaxy, the teachings of the Veil, the histories of the ancients, but never had I heard such a simple, absolute truth. The human was right. The Zill was a perfect killing machine, but it was a machine. It operated on instinct. The human operated on a principle that was both beautiful and terrifying. Jax looked at me and a small, sad smile touched his lips. "Don't get me wrong, Kalen. The universe is full of things that are stronger than me, things that are faster, things that are meaner. I'm not the apex predator because I'm the toughest. I'm the apex predator because I have the most to lose. And that," he concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is the most dangerous thing of all." He whistled for Rex and the dog came bounding back, the leather ball in his mouth. They turned and walked away, two figures, one tall and weary, the other small and joyful, disappearing into the endless, chaotic flow of the space station. As I watched them go, I understood the true power of humanity. It wasn't in their technology or their strength. It was in their ability to form bonds so powerful, so all-consuming, that they could reshape the very fabric of their reality. The Zill Prime had seen a vulnerable animal and an easy meal. It had made a critical error. It had seen the dog, but it had failed to see the human. And in doing so, it had stumbled upon the galaxy's most dangerous secret. That the real apex predator was the one who had something to lose, the one who was willing to fight not just for his own life, but for the life of another. The Zill Prime learned that lesson the hard way. But the rest of the galaxy, That was a lesson we were all just beginning to understand. The universe is full of monsters and it's also full of men. But when a man has a dog, the odds are never in the monster's favor. We had been looking at the wrong apex predator all along. We had been measuring the wrong thing. The true apex predator isn't the one with the sharpest claws, but the one with the most to protect. He had a reason to fight. And that, more than any weapon, is what makes him the most dangerous being in the galaxy. It's not about being the strongest. It's about being the one who refuses to lose. We had all seen a human win a fight against a Zill, but what we had really witnessed was something far more profound. We had witnessed the power of a promise. And that promise, that unshakable bond, is what makes humanity the most terrifying species in the cosmos.